before we get started on this one, Owen informed me that somebody left a comment on the one with the Grudge and the Ring that we did last time, and mentioned something actually quite notable, which is they had suggested doing Cronenberg's The Fly and Carpenter's The Thing as a sort of horror-related versus also. And it just immediately was like, oh, yeah, that probably should totally happen, and like, how did I not think of that by now? Um, I do already have like the schedule mapped out for the entire month of these, but that one I may just go ahead and do like after the fact, like it'll just be the first one in November or something, because I don't think I want to hold off on it for another year or anything like that. So I will definitely plan on doing that one also. But in the meantime, we have this one, which I think is kind of a long time coming. Another one that seems totally obvious, yet just kind of somehow kept getting pushed off. But I figured now would probably be the best time to do it. Where we go into Leica, which we've talked about before, when, like, you know, Cuba and the Two Strings and the Boss Trolls came out, and Missing Link this year, I think. And so that just leaves these on the. There was also their involvement with Corpse Bride, if you count that also. Um, and yeah, so I figured this one speaks for itself. I think I want to start with Coraline, where we take the brilliance the Like is known for, with this kind of being their first major feature length project, I think. And obviously we're combining that with the brilliant mind of Neil Gaiman, and it gave us this movie that just sort of... I kind of felt a bit, like, really caught off guard with it, because I remember vividly when it came out in February of 2009, and it was just kind of seemed like it was at a point where, like, you know, Pixar was ruling the universe, and stuff like that, and all the Disney stuff, and then, you know, DreamWorks every now and then had something really great. Um, and so this just kind of seemed like another animated movie. It was kind of like, when you saw a little bit, like, in the TV spots and all like that, there was something eye-catching about it, but it's like, oh, it's probably just another, you know, uh, Nightmare Before Christmas-esque sort of movie or whatever. And then I saw it, and I just couldn't believe it. Speaking of Nightmare Before Christmas, of course, this is the movie where I kind of feel like Henry Selick was finally able to make a name for himself after this, with always being, like, pushed off to the side when people just associating Nightmare Before Christmas with Burton's name. And I think, as beloved as it was, I don't even think James and the Giant Peach got his name out there as much as it probably should have. In the way that I think Coraline finally gave him that. Oh, people should, like, totally know this name by now. Um, and also going into it, that's worth noting, because we're going to kind of talk about, you know, the animation and how they accomplished that and how amazing that is. But there's something else about this movie that's kind of unique in regards to how I typically feel about some of the things in it. That being the 3D aspect, where not only was it made with the stop motion animation, but it was also made, like, specifically for 3D also. And I am, like, aggressively anti 3D 99.9% of the time, because I don't think it adds anything, and everything looks darker and gloomier and all that, and there's really no point to it most of the time. But Coraline in 3D is, like, one of the most amazing movie experiences you maybe could have. It's really incredible, and actually really does a service to the animation and really makes it come to life even more than, you know, it does already. Like, the animation itself does so much of that work when you're just watching, like, a regular 2D version, which I've also done many times, and it's... Yeah, so that's something that I've always recommended to people if it's ever possible. So then you go into the story itself, where we have Coraline, who is in this setting. They've just sort of moved into this place, the Pink Palace, and despite that name, the Pink Palace, this is just the bleakest looking place ever. It's, like, so gray, and it was, like, it's sort of like if there was a season between fall and winter, there was almost like sort of like a season purgatory. That would be like the entire time that that these scenes in particular are set in. It's also like always raining, and which pretty much perfectly fits the personality of Coraline, who's basically like, I guess on top of her going to totally strange world and just wanting to find her way back home. This opening also kind of makes her like a sort of modern day Dorothy Gale of sorts, where she's just sort of ignored by everybody, and it's almost like she herself is annoyed with her own existence. On top of being ignored by everybody else and everybody seeming too busy and all that, to even notice that she's there. And she's away from all of her friends and everybody she used to know, and it's just this really dull existence now. And then we just kind of see like everything around her is just like pressing her buttons at this point, like the lumps in the rug, or when she goes to wash her hands over the faucet and the rusty water comes out of the shower. Um, and it's like everything is just sort of like these are the last straws that are going to break the camel's back before she just wants to completely get out of this place. Which is conveniently when she finds the door in the wall that's going to do that for her. And it's like, and even going on that, just the way her character is, it's like, I like the fact that she's able to pretty much act her age. Like, she pretty much acts exactly like a character at that age you would expect to, the way they just sort of hate the world, and particularly their parents and all that, and just sort of want to defy everything. But they're able to do that without making us, like, resent her. Like, it's like we're able to acknowledge it's like, yeah, that's about, how a girl like her would probably act, especially in this setting that seems made to drive her totally insane. Um, but then she goes through the door, and then we see the other world. And it's like you can sense the whole, by contrast, how this world looks versus what the vibrancy of that world. And like not just how the other parents do all the things she wishes her real parents would do, but just the setting in general. Um, Even just the look of everything. Everything is just sort of more alive and colorful in a sense. And that's before we even see like the garden that has her face in it, or the circus with the mice. And that's kind of the thing also is, and sometimes it brings stuff to life even more so. Like there are characters in sort of the dull real world, like Mr. Robinski or Miss Megan Miss Forcible, where they're just these people that are like their careers are like way in the past, but they still kind of live there in their minds. With Miss Megan Miss Forcible specifically having former careers that we'd rather never imagine them in. And it's like they're colorful and sort of lively in either world, but the way the other world is able to amplify them even more um, really says something about how sort of great the character work is here. We also got Keith David voicing the cat, which is really interesting because this was the same year as The Princess and the Frog, where he voiced Dr. Facile. So, and it's like the way he sort of the thing I love about the cat's character is it's like you can never. At first, you kind of are always wondering what side he's on because he's obviously helping her, but at the same time, there's just something so inherently sinister about Keith David's voice. Especially thinking about it coming out opposite ends of the year, but still the same year as The Princess and the Frog. And then there's stuff like I'm paraphrasing because I can't quite remember, but it's a line akin to her saying like she's talking about the other mother, and she's like, mothers don't eat their daughters, and his response is, well, how do you taste? Uh, and stuff like that really takes these characters a long way, also. And then just the whole creepy idea about this whole thing obviously being a facade, because like even when it's this new and magical place that's drawing her in, with all of its wonder, there's still some sort of underlying creepy factor before they even really reveal it too much. The buttons obviously being the most vivid example of this. Or the fact that the other mother can make anything happen, where it's like, oh, you think YB talks too much? Well, now he just doesn't talk at all because I did that. And it's like Coraline doesn't really question right away, like, how did she make that happen exactly, and was it painful and stuff like that. But then, obviously, as the movie goes on, we realize just how much of the facade was right there in front of her face. Particularly the song that the other father sings at the piano, which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie because, like, it's so. Once you realize what it is, it's so dooming, but, like, it's still so. Like, even though I know he put those dooming clues in there, like, she's as cute as a button, obviously, is the main one, and then Our Eyes Will Be on Coraline is the last lyric, kind of telling her what exactly is up with the doll that she found that looks just like her and what its job is. Um, but there's even knowing that though, that scene with the piano is like so um, just lively and really is the kind of the starting point for showing just how fantastical the world is. The first time we see the hands pop out of the piano, and it just all really works, even when you already know what it is underlying, and even stuff like talking about how they're watching her constantly. The whole idea that it's good at the start because she's getting paid attention to. Um, but even then, even when it's supposedly the happy portion where she's oblivious, the idea that the first time she goes to sleep in the other world, and they just sit by her bedside and watch her until she falls asleep. It's like it's all of the clues are right there, and it can it does a good job of doubling as even when you know it can still you can still feel that at the start of it through her perspective at that time, but you can also see how creepy it all is even before it really takes off. Um, and there's clues all around also like there's a point in time where like it's sort of in the middle the other mother is wearing something, and if you like, not that I made a habit out of checking out the other mother, but there are some scenes where whatever she's wearing, her ass looks like the back of a spider, which is really sort of eerie when, like I said, you know where that's going, especially as it's getting closer and closer to that. And the fact that whether it be like the trees or the lightning or whatever, there's like there's so much hidden imagery in regards to the other mother's hands looking like they're just everywhere. And it's like just really, you can just almost feel like the ticking clock of this shit's about to get really insane. So it makes me also wonder, with the whole idea of the other world and the other mother and other father and all that, and how there's the separate worlds and all that. I started to wonder earlier this year if maybe because he hasn't been shy about his inspirations. I wonder if Jordan Peele had this movie in mind at all when he made Us a little bit, because I can sort of see some connotations there also. But I do think another thing that makes it work is when it kind of gets to the more emotional core, because we talk about her, like, the way she resents her family and the way she feels neglected by everything, and just like she's just living in the wrong place. And then when her parents are taken towards the end, and like the genuine sadness that comes from that, where we have this like the scene where she like makes her parents in bed out of like pillows. There's just something like really sad about that before going into the. I mean, because it's already opened the door, quite literally, to the scary shit that it has up its sleeve. And the fact that they can sort of put a really genuinely emotional moment in there, like in between all that, in between it going totally crazy, just kind of shows just how much they have control over their tone, and how rich these characters are. So that also helps the whole just the feeling of dread that her parents have been taken. Because otherwise, the Coraline at the beginning of this movie may not have. She would have seen it as a blessing, like jumping around like Kevin McAllister for all we knew. But by the time it gets to this point, and she knows what's coming in the other world, should she stay there, and the danger that it is, and just really becomes this whole sort of scary concept just in general. Like, even without the freaky ass imagery that comes with it, just the concept alone is pretty terrifying, and like relatable in that sense that it's like real feelings that young people can actually feel, just amplified for this fantastical, story. So, um, and then obviously, when everything gets crazy and scarier, and it's kind of goes down a different path than just being sort of because you see, an animated movie and you immediately think like children's movie. But it is, I want to say it was Selig or somebody had mentioned that he considered it to be more for brave children than just, you know, generally children that this movie was made for. Though it was also, this is a movie that has, like, can have such a wide audience is what makes it so great also. Where you can't just put it necessarily in that one box. There's so many different kinds of people that would get something out of this because it has so much to offer, whether it be, children because it's fantastical and animated, or there's, your horror crowd could really take to it. And then just the artistry behind the way it's made. There's, like, so many different areas to love about this. Um, and in that way, talking about the way it's made, where some of this stuff does get really crazy, like the way the characters start to move, the more the facade starts to drop. Particularly with the other father, it just gets increasingly, like everybody's on about how the other mother becomes a lot scarier and becomes like much more monstrous. There's something a lot more sort of off to the side, really weird and creepy about the way the other father sort of deteriorates, especially since I think because the attention mainly goes to the other mother because she's the big threat, and the other father's been trying to warn her this whole time. But his deterioration is, like, to me, a lot creepier than any look that the other mother has. Whether it be when he's, just the way he moves as he's, like, falling apart, or the praying mantis thing and all that. Um, and even past that, like the Ghost Kids or the YB flag. I remember that being especially like I remember an audible reaction in the theater at the at the thought of that's what YB's fate was in the other world. Is like really surprising and kind of shocking when you first see it. And that's like what the movie has up its sleeve like the whole time. Like it kind of keeps pulling stuff out like that, like the unexpected. And gets crazy. But yeah, talking about the stop motion, this is kind of I mean, it's in any stop motion movie, obviously, but I mean, in this one kind of in particular, and we'll go into it with ParaNorman also. Stop motion itself will, like, never not be one of the most impressive things ever to me. Like, like I could like immerse myself in just watching over and over again like making of featurettes and watching them go through the whole process and all that, and I still can't wrap my head around that. It is like because it's too incredible. And it's like they make these movies over the span of like months and years, but when you hear about the process, it's like, how does one movie not take an entire lifetime with this? No matter how many people you have working on it, where like every single tiny little thing is made from scratch, is insane, and the way everything's like puppeted and moved and all that. Like all the clothes are like knitted with like the really tiny needles specifically, and it's yeah, and I just can't even wrap my mind around that. No matter how much I watch like the special features, it's just a really incredible thing. And like the way every character, every set, every other thing has to be made so precisely and so individually, and it's a level of artistry that it's so hard to fathom, and like is yeah, I just can't. It makes me speechless. I just run out of words. And to have that kind of thing on top of a story that's already great, thanks to Gaiman and then the adaptation that Selig did, is there's just so many things coming together here. Um, another one of the sets, I guess you'd call it, that I've always loved is the way the floor falls out into the spider web is like one of my favorite things in the world. And it's like it's just the perfect example of these perfect combinations with storytelling and writing, style, animation, the voice work. I mentioned a little bit. Dakota Fanning especially also plays a lot into the strengths that Coraline has as a character that makes us stick with her even if she might be the unbearable teenager. And the score also it needs to be recognized. It's like because it's so eerie and dooming and fits that mood, but it does it without being like overbearing like it really easily could have. So yeah, I can't think of a thing that I dislike about Coraline. So it's like it'd be one thing if all that work went into like because you think about that much work going into something and you're like, well, if they put all the effort into the work itself, like the physical work, how much does that leave for like the story and making it surprising and unique? And Coraline does all of that, just all of it all at once, and makes a movie that has been rarely matched, if at all. Come to think of it. So, and I'll say something about that also once we finish talking about ParaNorman, which I guess we can start talking about now. Chris Butler is our writer and director on this one, and this is kind of where Coraline kind of had its own really unique feel to it in regards to like the sort of eerie factor and the scary factor and all that. ParaNorman itself just kind of feels almost like this loving homage to like B movies, which we get immediately when it starts with like when we see the opening logos and then we see this movie within the movie that's like this really terrible monster movie that was made for like on like a $5 budget. Where it's like the boom mic is in the shot and she has to push it out of the way. The actress is so not into the screaming that she just has to keep hyping herself back up to do it. And it's like what must be in the world of the movie one of the worst movies ever made. But the interesting thing about that is that you think about the stop motion process and how it is perfected just as much here as it's ever been. And so they have to take this really precise method that they have mastered and make a bad movie to start this movie off with. And it's like, which still perfectly captures the feel of like those old horror movies. And it's, so that in itself is this really grand task. And that's like the first 10 seconds of the movie. So that's off to a really good start, and then obviously it kind of carries on the whole. You can see how Coraline was kind of surprised and sort of how mature it felt. ParaNorman kind of seems to take advantage of that immediately. It's like, well, we already know what we got in Coraline, so they can just continue on with it without us sort of feeling too like they kind of have to pull us back into the world again. And they're not going to be shy with some of their dialogue either, like we have when Norman walks in and his mom asks him what he's watching, and just how casually, in this supposed children's movie, he just answers, sex and violence, that sort of thing. And in the same scene, we hear the dad, voiced by Jeff Garlin, refer to limp-wristed hippie garbage. These are just lines you don't hear typically in movies like this. So that's refreshing in itself before we even get into everything else. And I do really I've always loved the character of Norman himself and the way they sort of set up that he's like this. They set up his love for horror and horror movies and all that, and his connection to the afterlife and the ghosts and all that. But also just this real outcast vibe to him without him ever feeling too cliche. And I think one of the ways they really accomplished that is this opening that's so perfectly done and just the perfect introduction to him, because I love the choice of starting off with us not see, except for his grandma, we don't see the other ghost. We just see him walking down the road and just talking to the air, and he looks like an insane person. We'd almost wonder how legit it is if we hadn't seen his grandma already. But then there's that moment where the music rises and the camera turns and then we see what he sees, and it's like the town is just filled with them, and it's like that's such an amazing reveal, but also says so much about the character also, to where it starts off showing us where we don't see the ghost, and we can just kind of sort of see, like, just with our own eyes, just the outcast that he is, just seeing him talk to people, and just this vast emptiness that is the road. But then we see, how sort of, I guess, the way he's able to socialize much more than he is with humans, the way he can with the ghosts, and just do it so casually. It's like almost like this is where he belongs. And yeah, and then he gets to the school, and we meet pretty much the rest of our characters, and the other characters through the characters we meet at the school also, like Neil, who's great, who, once again, much like Norman, is a character that seems like they should be such a cliche, just the fat kid that's picked on for being fat kid, and he's like the, funny friend of the main character and all that. But what makes this work is that the characters are so likable that even though these are cliche types, they are sort of genuinely sympathetic and also genuinely funny. Because the movie itself is like really, really damn funny, which is a really great asset to have going into this. Because then you've got Cody Smith McPhee also playing Norman, is pretty much perfect. But then you've also got, when we're introduced to Neil's brother, Casey Affleck. I still remember how hard we all laughed when we saw it in the theater, because I had no idea that was his voice. I don't think anybody else did either. And when it was almost like a reveal in the credits to us. It was like the funniest thing ever that was Casey Affleck. And then you've also got Anna Kendrick playing Norman's sister. And once again, these are all, I think I read somewhere, if they seem like their character types, it's not only is it intentional, but they're like supposedly loosely based on The Breakfast Club, which is really interesting, which I'm assuming would make, I guess that would make Mitch, Emilio Estevez, Courtney, the Anna Kendrick character, Molly Ringwald, Neil would be Anthony Michael Hall, because he's like the sort of, I guess, dorky one. I guess that would make Norman Ali Sheedy, I guess, because, like, the weird outcast, I suppose. And then that would leave Alvin, the bully who can't even spell his own name, who's very aggressive, sort of in the way that Bender would be, Judd Nelson. So I guess that's what they meant by that. And I guess I can also kind of see that, and that's also much like the characters in The Breakfast Club. We spend enough time with them, and there's enough to their characters, and they're likable enough characters and funny enough that they can be types, but still be incredibly entertaining, and maybe even say something about those types in the process. So, and then of course Jeff Garland and Leslie Mann as the parents also. I also just love some of the little digs they throw in there every now and again, like when they're at the play and the dad can't get his camera to work in this sea of red lights. And they just sort of take a dig at those people that record stuff like that, where he's like, "Oh, now I'll never remember this moment." And it's like it's something that doesn't have anything to do with anything else, but is appreciated nonetheless. And then and another person that really stands out is John Goodman, who seems to be having a shitload of fun voicing the crazy uncle that tells Norm what he needs to do before he dies twice. He thinks he's beaten death, but he has not. And then we get a little bit of a young Frankenstein type scene of him trying to remove the book from his hands. And it's like, it's so... And to think the process of making this movie is taxing enough, but to be able to make successful physical comedy that works so well... is like not only do they have the talent to pull this kind of animation off, but what they can, like, the further layers they can make this into an accomplishment is insane to me. But and then, yeah, like I was saying, it goes into it basically feels like sort of like, to use a cliche, like a love letter to, horror in general. And, other movies like that, where he's got, like, he's got the ringtone that's the Halloween theme, then he looks outside, and it's like the shot in Halloween when Laurie looks outside and he's there in the clotheslines, but he's wearing a hockey mask instead. There's the very, I think it's my favorite scene in the movie, is the vending machine. Where the guy can't decide if he really wants the bag of chips or wants to risk getting attacked by zombies. Um, and what he's gonna do. And on the side of the vending machine, it's I can't tell exactly what it says, but it's like the same font as Suspiria, and it's words close to that. And so just things like that, and that's just to name a few. They're all over the place. Um, all of that really works. Like I said, the movie is extremely funny, and it like to the point that while Coraline does have funny moments in it, Coraline feels so incredibly serious by comparison, because there's so much of the comedy aspect to this one. Um, but I do think, well, they do also have a really good story going on with who the zombies are and what their backstory is, given what the witch is and how it seems like this horror story, but then just immediately with one reveal of who the witch is, or what the witch is, I guess you could say, it's suddenly very tragic for everybody. Like, even the zombies, who we should not necessarily feel sorry for at all because they put this little girl to death thinking she's a witch, still makes them sympathetic because of the whole message of what people do when they're scared thing. Um, and so there's that, but I do think a problem that ParaNorman has that Coraline doesn't is that it does eventually get a bit repetitive, where like it kind of hits a dry spot in the middle where it's like once they get to like the library and like the mob forms and all that, the middle does kind of become a bit of a drag, which is still, it still seems ludicrous to say, because it's like to still think what had to go into making this movie. Like, even the parts that are a drag are still a massive accomplishment that took so much time. um, but yeah, as far as story flow goes, as hard as it is to say, I do think we kind of hit a bit of a repetitive streak. But even so, there's still enough of, like, the physical comedy and the action, where there's like a really big chase scene with Mitch's van and the zombie on top of it and all that, where they combine like action and the comedy also, and it all just works really nicely. But even so, yeah, as we were talking about with Coraline, the animation just cannot get enough credit, whether it be like the way that toilet paper ghosts form when John Goodman's telling him the story of what he needs to do, or when you just look at the details of like Norman's hair by itself, how it looks so simple the way it stands up, but how like every individual thing is there, and even the way one of the features talks about how the shoes that Norman wears are like actually made like just like actual shoes to make sure that they also move that way, like in the close up where he's walking down the sidewalk at the beginning, that they just fit him exactly as an actual shoe would, even though it's like this size. It's yeah, and it's, talking about the memorable score in Coraline, this one also has one, but obviously a different kind, where it kind of went the more retro 70s horror movie route. But at the same time, they kind of do a combination where it's like it just sounds like a retro 70s score, but like with a mixture of something that sounds more akin to today. And they kind of put the two together and made something that really works. Um, and yeah, and then of course it eventually has something to say, like we were talking about with like mob mentality, and like the whole refusing to understand something and like basically acting out in fear, and like the terrible things that can do even if you don't mean them to. And like incidentally enough, making such human characters out of a supposed witch and zombies. And like the way we see them come out, and then the way that mirrors the mob themselves, who, much like the people in the court, went after the little girl because they just didn't understand and immediately resorted to acting out in fear. So did the mob when they saw the zombies, and it's just a full circle thing. Um, so there's definitely something there, but yeah. even so, I do think it's really... Because the thing I was going to say was... there's so much going for ParaNorman, and then I know people really love Kubo and the Two Strings a lot, and I'm one of those people. I know the box trolls, even a little bit more off the radar, does have its fan. There's one girl in particular I know that like is obsessed with the box trolls still. Um, and Missing Link certainly had its moments also, but I don't think like as a company has topped Coraline yet. And I think I would say that the main argument people might make would be Kubo and the Two Strings, but Coraline is just kind of the yeah. Coraline has got to be the best animated. I'm trying not to. I'm trying to think as I say this. I don't want to feel like I'm jumping the gun, but I'm pretty sure since the 2000s, like from the year 2000 to now, so like a 20-year area almost. Coraline might be my favorite animated movie. I really want to say that. I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm not thinking of. But I really want to say that, so that might be the case. So, so yeah, that's, I think all I can really say about these. I don't think I missed anything major, that I could speak on. So, I guess that'll be it for this. The next one, we're going to go a bit classic, and then the one after that is going to be sort of in, like, the comedic area. There's really the next one after the one after the next one that's coming is mainly coming because there's one movie I really want to just explore again. And then, yeah, we'll keep going. So, and then the reviews will still be the same. And everything else. Yeah, and then the extra videos with my brother. So, that's, I think, going to be it for this. So until all that other stuff, that's it.